Excellent. So welcome once again to the Israeli Space Meetup. My name is Donoviel. I'm the current chairwoman of the WiSpace Association and one of the 7 founding board members, some of which we are also here. And for those of us, those of you who are unfamiliar with WiSpace, allow me just for a couple of minutes to tell you who we are and what it is we do before we start our meetup and the lectures. So WiSpace, the Association for Israeli Women in Space, we envision gender equity in Israel's thriving space sector. We say gender equity and not equality because gender equity is the process of bringing fair resources and measures to compensate for historical and social disadvantages between men and women. Actually, equity is the path to equality, and by ensuring equity and allowing these measures, we can help empower and bring women on an equal operating field and being part of the decision-making process. And how do we do this? We do this by providing a platform for both personal and professional development and having opportunities to increase our members' visibility within the Israeli space sector. We do this by meetups like we do now, networking events, we do mentorship program, as well as organizing conferences. And also in our wider area of networking, we allow for providing the connections within our group and helping, whether it is in an individual question or finding the right member and connection on a daily basis, whether it is just to find somebody or even as recently helping from one question to another and allowing a young girl to participate in some contest that was preventing for Israeli participants. Our mentorship program, we do this by having one-on-one mentorships or also some workshops, professional development goals, personal guidance in some crosswords or different questions, helping with the know-how of how to find the scholarships, the opportunities, and even filling out the different forms and finding who is the right person to talk to and having these connections. All the time we're finding that through these opportunities, we have more ideas and lots of great stuff happening just by having the opportunity to talk and connect and having our own group, which is starting to get quite big actually. We have 50 members in our association and more than 200 in the wide area of the networking chat. And we had lots of activities in the last year. We started, unfortunately, a virtual meetup during the Israeli Space Week last year and ended it with another virtual meetup due to COVID restrictions. But between those, we had opportunities to meet in person, whether it is having an editathon together with Wikimedia Israel for editing articles about Israeli women in space in Hebrew Wikipedia. We had a management workshop for young managers and experienced get-togethers. We had one of our members participate in the IAC in the Young Professional Program through a scholarship. And our biggest event was together with the Israeli Space Agency and the World Space Week. We had a big Women in Space conference, and it was really exciting to see a whole lot of people fill the auditorium. We had several sessions. We had Pascal Ehrenfeld as our guest speaker, as distinguished speaker, and it was a really empowering and wonderful event. And we have much more energies and ideas for 2022. So we are hoping that if you want, come join us in our association. And even if you have ideas, what to do, questions, we are all available here in the chat or afterwards. Feel free to. So today we have two special talks that we are having for you. The first one is by Dr. Diana Laufer. Dr. Laufer is the scientific director of the Givatayim Observatory in Israel, leading the educational and public astronomy of space education programs. Dr. Laufer holds a PhD from the Tel Aviv University in planetary sciences. She is a specialist in cometary ice and icy bodies in the solar system. In her last role, Laufer was the head of the Comet Reseach Laboratory in the Tel Aviv University. She's a lecturer and PhD research mentor, currently working on a new nanosatellite project. Dr. Diana Laufer is a member of the Israeli Astronomical Association and a member of the IAU, International Astronomical Union. So, Dr. Laufer, please go ahead.
You did a lot of homework.
Okay.
So, good evening, everybody, and I'm glad to be here. And just a moment, I share my presentation for this evening. And I'll talk about what else I can talk about. Oh my God. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, because I've got an announcement that my Zoom was stopped. Yeah, okay. So we'll start. And since my PhD and all my academic life was on research, cometary research, and this is a great opportunity to talk about what else? Comets. But the trigger to this lecture was Comet Leonard, which sent us very nice pictures.
Diana, excuse me to interrupt you. Can you move your presentation into presentation mode? Because we see the many slides.
Oh, it is in presentation.
No.
In my?
Okay.
Oh, just a moment, I'll try again.
Okay.
Yes.
Diana tried to unshare and reshare. You shared probably the PowerPoint and not the PowerPoint presentation.
I think
So
if you go
can
under
share
view,
the whole screen.
I think if you go under view, it should give you like present option. On the top menu, like second from the right is view.
Yes, but I don't have a.
The best is to stop sharing and reshare, and I think it should help.
Yeah, but I cannot enlarge the Zoom screen. Have only mute, stop, choose video, and rename.
Do a stop share, and then when you reshare,
Stop
try
video.
to share
No,
it.
it was a stop video. No, it's not good. Start video.
Okay, I'll stop your sharing, and now you can reshare.
Oh, okay. Share screen. Now it's okay.
Just 1 minute.
Now it's okay.
1 minute. It's loading. Okay.
See the presentation? Zoom is quit unexpectedly, but I'm still on.
I think
Did
we
you lose Diana?
lost Diana.
Lost Diana?
Oh, Diana, you're here. Do you want to try and reshare and share again?
Yes,
Okay.
now it's okay.
Yes,
Okay, now it's
yes, perfect.
I don't know. I think that I have two Zooms. I think doesn't matter. So we saw at the end of the last year some beautiful pictures of Comet Leonard, and I said, oh, comets are back again. Now I cannot move on. Oh, yes. And for this year, we have an Hungarian comet. I don't know to pronounce this name, but we already saw a beautiful comet over Budapest. And we are expecting on the summer of this year, a very bright comet, which was observed already very far away. So we expect in the summer to have a beautiful comet. So the comets are online again. So let's talk some details about what we know about comets. So comets are the most beautiful objects in the solar system because I studied them. And they have a solid nucleus made of gas, rocks, and ice. And as they approach the sun, they develop a tail, a dust tail, and an ion tail. And thus we can observe them from Earth since their distance, they are near maybe Saturn or even farther away. As they approach the sun, they develop a very big tail, and then they disappear. Some comets are very, can be seen only once on a lifetime, and some comets are periodical. Why do we study comets? We study comets because our composition and cometary composition are almost the same. And they linked us to the origin of life and the formation of the solar system. And we can understand the composition of the solar nebula before planets were formed. Also, we can learn about volatiles and the origin of the atmosphere. How do we study comets? We study comets by observation, of course, and by planetary missions and mathematical models, and also laboratory studies. And at Tel Aviv University, we had a little bit of everything. Some of the first observation of water on comets was at Tel Aviv University, and some modeling are very famous. And also our lab fits the direct observations. Our lab contains two machines, vacuum machines at low temperature. This one, it was first, and afterwards for my PhD, we built a special vacuum chamber, and we managed to study bulk properties of comets. As we studied comets, also there were some direct observations from spacecraft, and thus I understood that I studied comets for all the, I followed all the space missions, so it took a long time. Since Comet Halley and until the last mission to comets, the Rosetta mission. The Rosetta mission was the most complex comet mission, and we managed to understand a lot about comets, and I was a part of the committee of the analyzing of the gas content of and structure of comets. Look, some beautiful picture of the nucleus, and every time I'm looking, it's fantastic to see the details of the observations. I put a small movie because there is a lot of details that were never observed and it's fascinating to see them. Also, water ice was observed on the surface, so it enhanced our understanding about cometary activity. We also could explain in the laboratory some features that were directly observed on the comet. And I won't get into details because it's a general presentation. So we could understand that our data fits the direct observation also. About the water on Earth, cometary volatiles fit observation of hot cores or dense cloud, and also comets provided the Earth with some of the water. At the beginning of my study, it was about half of the water was from comets. Now they said that about a quarter of the water was from comets, or maybe 20%, and the other part is from meteorites at the beginning of the formation of the atmosphere of the Earth. Also, we study some volatile content. I'll not entering the details, but we could determine the temperature formation of the comet. This is very important to understand the gas content of the comet. So the temperature of the formation of the comets is about 30 degrees. Also, we could provide the exact content of the planetary solar nebula that forms the solar system. And we can understand where and what is the content of the solar nebula that forms our planet. And this is a very interesting question. Our next mission to Comet is it's not very far away. We believe that the mission is to get some sample from the cometary mission, and the comet that was that fits this mission was also the Rosetta comet, because we know it and we know what to dig for. And the mission is planned to 2024, and but the sample return, it's you can see here, it's 2038. It's a very long mission, and the question is how the sample will survive this long time. And you know, we have a problem with the chemistry. So this mission are part of the small body missions. They went to asteroids to bring samples, and now we are going to bring some ice from comets, and we see what are really made of. And this is a very big question and very interesting. So now the machine which you saw in the cometary lab is testing nanosatellites at Tel Aviv University, and we are hoping to finish the next nanosatellite of Tel Aviv University and to test it in this chamber, and we'll see. So do you have any questions?
If you have questions, feel free to put them at the chat. Or write to Emma or me.
Okay. If there is no question, if there are no questions, so we can move on. Thank you very much, Diana, for being with us.
Okay.
I just want to say that we're planning to have this session tonight at the Givatayim Observatory and to come visit you with everybody.
Okay.
But unfortunately, with the situation, so
you can see where to get to from my picture.
Yeah, behind you.
background.
So we decided to bring to you virtually the Givatayim Observatory and the great Diana that gave us this lecture on the comet.
And short.
Pardon, sorry?
A short one.
A short one, a short overview. There are much more to say, that's for sure.
We have one question on the chat.
Okay, great.
Do you have any suggestion how an amateur can photograph a comet? I will also add, can I see Comet Leonard still, or do I still have a chance? Okay.
Comet Leonard left to the south part, and now it's far away. It's getting away from Earth, but I believe that the comet, and that's why I brought it. In the summer, we have the new comet, and this will be very interesting because it's a very active comet. And we can, I hope we can make a lot of pictures at the Givatayim Observatory.
Do I need to be at an observatory to see it, or can I see in the summer from my own house?
I hope you'll see it. There were two bright comets that we observed by eye. It was Comet Hale-Bopp in 1997, and before this Hyakutake. But since then, there were very dim comets lately. Few years ago, there was a comet that it could be seen, but it was very faint. I hope that this comet, because it is estimated that it's relatively big, it's about 20 kilometers nucleus. We hope that we can observe it. So it's a holiday, a big holiday for the amateur astronomers.
We have another question: is how many different types of comets do we know, and how are they classified?
They are classified in periodical and not periodical comets, and there are comets. I didn't enter because I wasn't sure that the audience would like to know about, but there are Jupiter family comets, Kuiper belt comets, Oort cloud comets, and near the sun there are also sun grazing comets also. So they differ for the period of time that are coming, but their composition was not different in observation. This is a unknown subject. Why comets look like every comet? It's looking like the other, almost, and it's not depending on their origin. And this we could explain from our laboratory results that the ice is evaporating and it's taking everything out. So that this is an explanation of their activity.
Great, thank you.
Okay. So in the summer, I will organize another meeting, and I hope that everybody will come and take some pictures of the new comet.
Yeah, we're definitely
looking forward.
We're going to put it on our schedule, and you all are invited, hopefully in person.
Okay.
Great.
From the end of May till November, I think, something like this.
Excellent.
So thank you very much, Diana. So now I'm very happy, very glad to invite our next guest speaker, who is connecting from far away, Dorit, Dr. Dorit Donoviel from the TRISH Institute, the Translational Research Institute for Space Health. So exciting to have you with us tonight. Thank you, Dorit, and good day for you. It's the midday. So I think that the TRISH Institute is at a very interesting and interesting junction of space research, exploring other disciplines to allow human space exploration. And we are very much hoping to hear from you about what you're doing and what kind of research, and also the collaboration that are open and offering, and what is the best way that will be to connect with the TRISH Institute. And you can also mention your participation to the Rakia mission. Everybody here on the call is, I think that everybody is aware of the Rakia mission. So it's also very interesting to hear about your what you're going to be doing there. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, and Erev Tov. I am an Israeli. I'm a Sabra. I was born and raised in Israel until age 10, and I left Israel a long time ago, but my Hebrew is still okay. And unfortunately, though, it's a 10-year-old Hebrew, so my technical lexicon isn't quite as good, but it is absolutely my pleasure to connect with Israeli women. It really feels like coming home for me. And so we will stick with English, but we can talk a mixture of Heblish if you wish during my Q&A. So with that, I'm just thrilled to have this opportunity. I am going to share my screen, and if you could just give me a thumbs up if you see it. Yes?
Yeah, we see it, but you're not in the presentation mode.
How about now?
Yes, now it is.
Fantastic. Okay. So I'm going to talk to you about innovating for health, for being healthy in the space environment. And I'll try to draw connections between what we're doing in space and how that really impacts healthcare here on Earth. So I am really lucky because I have one of the coolest jobs in the world. And sometimes I pinch myself when I wake up in the morning. Am I really still doing this amazing job? I am the executive director of a NASA-funded institute that's based in Houston, here in Texas, at Baylor College of Medicine. So I'm also faculty at Baylor College of Medicine. And our institute has consortium partners, California Institute of Technology, Caltech on the west coast of the US, and then MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology on the East Coast. And our job is nothing short of finding the best technologies and innovations in health, in medicine, in engineering, in science, technologies that can make sure that humans are healthy in space when they go into space, whether it's for short duration or long duration space flight, whether it's the vicinity of Earth, around the Earth itself and the International Space Station, or beyond that, to the moon, or even further out to Mars, which is a very far destination. They remain healthy and sane. So some of the psychological effects of being in space as well. So while NASA, our partner, is making steady progress towards reducing the risks to the health and performance of humans in space, NASA is an organization that over the years has become risk averse. It has such a strong culture to make sure that people don't make mistakes, because things can happen, obviously, that are quite consequential. They wanted a partner in our organization, TRISH, that would be able to be more agile and be able to take more risks in order to not have the fear of failure, and to make those giant leaps in science and technology and medicine that could potentially make us able to do all those things that really are kind of beyond our reach right now. And that is really keeping humans healthy on a long duration, deep space mission. So what are we going to do? What is the goal? So right now on the International Space Station, we've been living in space for the last 20 years continuously. Roughly 600 people have been to space, a little bit less than that. And so when you think about the 20-year mission, and even 50 years since we were last on the moon, it's not a lot of people when you count year by year how many people have been to space all in all. There's not a lot of them, but we kind of figured out a lot of things. But the US space program has determined that we are going back to the moon, and it's an international effort. There'll be other countries that will join with putting human boot prints back on the moon in around 2024, 2025. And so by going back to the moon, we actually have some new things to develop. But we've always intended to learn how to live in space, whether it's around the International Space Station and then beyond that on the moon's surface, so that we can take that long trip to Mars, which will take roughly about a year and a half round trip minimum, and up to 3 years if we're going to stay on the Mars surface. So going very far away from Earth really changes the paradigm in terms of how we keep humans healthy. So our job really is to think about how do we keep those humans healthy beyond the protection of our atmosphere here around the Earth on the moon's surface. And then again, thinking about the future in about 10 to 15 years going to Mars. So as I mentioned before, very few people have been to space all in all over the last 70 years, 50 years since we last landed on the moon, but even before that, the beginning of the Apollo program. And we want to increase the N. What does N mean? N is what you would call in science or engineer or even economics, the number of samples that you could study. So the N in this case is the number of people who have been to space, which I told you is actually less than 600. Because we are all so different in how we respond to a novel virus or even how we respond to the space environment, the more people we can study, the more we can increase the N, the more we can really make sure that when any human goes into space, they do so safely. So what our institute has done is partnered up with a lot of the commercial spaceflight companies. We are continuing to work with NASA and studying its own astronauts. But as I mentioned before, those missions have sort of become fewer and fewer. So there's less people going into space. But now we're seeing regular individuals going into space. For example, customers that are flying on the SpaceX mission that we recently partnered with, Space Adventures. Axiom is about to fly 4 individuals, including one Israeli, which you've heard about, the Rakia mission. And then Blue Origin is taking people up and down into suborbital flights as well. So we've partnered with all of these companies in order to start studying more people. So what are the hazards of spaceflight? And I'm going to give you kind of a very rough sketch. NASA has organized these hazards into 5 different areas. So the extreme isolation. So on the space station, they don't get to see their families for 4 to 6 months. They can pick up the phone and talk to them, but it's not a face-to-face capability. As you move out further away from Earth, the isolation will become much more of a problem. On the International Space Station, there's actually quite a lot of room. But as you move further away from Earth, the space capsule has to be small in order to get it up away from gravity. And so the volume in which you can live for long periods of time becomes smaller and smaller. And so the isolation, and as you move further away towards Mars, it can become quite daunting for your mental health. So extreme isolation over a long duration space mission is a concern. We are worried about how the humans will behave when they're very far away from Earth and when there's even a lack in direct communication because of the distance from Earth. You get delay in communication back and forth. Gravitational field. What do I mean by that? Our bodies have adjusted to a gravitational field here, and it's important to our health, the health of our bones, our muscles, our hearts, the way the fluid is distributed in our body. All of those things are absolutely affected by gravity. When you take gravity away, now the body has to respond, or it is responding in a new way. So the bones start to break down. The muscles don't need to work as hard. The heart doesn't work as hard. So you become deconditioned. Not a problem until you come back to a gravitational field after having spent that time in the zero gravity. Now, all of a sudden, you've got weak muscles and a weak heart in a gravity situation, and that could be a problem. The hostile enclosed environment, what this means is that you have to absolutely make every bit of water and every bit of clean air. If you're expiring out carbon dioxide, you have to scrub that away because too much carbon dioxide can be toxic to your brain and all kinds of other systems. So you're dependent on the machinery, the engineering to absolutely keep you healthy. So the closed environment and the hazards around you actually are something that we're worried about. Distance from Earth. What do I mean by that? We're not going to be able to resupply you if a part breaks down, or if you run out of food, or if your toilet breaks. And so all of those things become a challenge. And in particular, medical care. We have to send you with everything that you could possibly need in case you have a flu virus all of a sudden. Radiation. While people are on the International Space Station, they're still within the protection of our atmosphere. Once you leave that and you go to the moon, you are now exposed to space radiation, some of which comes from explosions like that give rise to comets, which we just heard about from the previous talk. And so radiation, some of which we can shield, some of which we absolutely cannot, because it would require so much material to block that type of radiation that it's really not feasible. So we know that when humans spend time on the moon surface or even on a trip to Mars, we are not going to be able to protect them from all that radiation. So why should you even care about this? So obviously there's applications for all the innovations we are developing in order to keep humans healthy in space for all of us Earthlings here on Earth who probably won't get a chance to go to space unless you're really, really lucky. So the isolation, there are behavior health and mental health solutions that we're developing for astronauts that are actually applicable for people here on Earth in isolation situations, particularly over the pandemic. The bone and heart health solutions that we're developing for astronauts absolutely have applications for people here on Earth who are sick and can't really leave their beds or are just getting old and are not moving around as much. The closed and hostile environment, there's a lot around recycling and food and capabilities and making sure that we use every piece of waste that we are producing. The distance from Earth presents a new model for being able to do medical care where the patient themselves is tracking their own health and being able to provide their own health care. So that is a real new challenge in how to provide health care in a new way. And then the radiation protectants that we're developing actually will increase our resiliency here on Earth to damage from the environment, which can give rise to cancer. So I know this is overwhelming. You don't need to memorize all of this. I just wanted to use the slide to show that every single physiological system and mental system really is affected in spaceflight. And so what's exciting for me as a biologist by training is that I get to study fairly healthy humans in a very challenging environment and start to tease out all kinds of fundamental questions about human physiology and how it works. So our institute, as I mentioned before, works closely with NASA, but we're supposed to find all kinds of new innovations and bring those into a funnel. We go to conferences, we read papers, we reach out to folks in Israel, we reach out to folks in Europe, and we find out what you guys are doing, what everybody's working on, and we try to connect the dots because oftentimes people don't even realize that the things they're working on for their own problem or issue or challenge here on Earth actually could be used to solve a problem for spaceflight. And then we bring everything in, and then we look for innovations that we can seed with some grant funding. And this is US tax dollars supported. So these are federal funds that we put into these innovations. And we look for things that can be most impactful for the space program. So I want to give you just a couple of examples since we don't have a lot of time. One example, and this is the first one here, is a highly developed, already mature technology. This is a medical device. It's an ultrasound that basically the entire ultrasound system is in that tiny probe that you see there called the butterfly. And it just plugs into a phone, a regular phone. It could be any phone. Right here, you see it plugged into an iPhone. And everything has been put on a microchip, the same one that would go into your smartphone or your smartwatch. And it could deliver ultrasound propulsion off of every kind of ultrasound propulsion that you could possibly need. Normally, a system like this would be huge and would cost tens of thousands of dollars, and you would need a special person in a hospital to take care to do this scan on you. Everything has been miniaturized and into an all-in-one. And this is perfect because we can't bring a lot of stuff with us when we go into space, whether it's to the International Space Station or going to the moon or even to Mars. Everything has to be miniaturized. And so this device right here is something that we invested in and showed that it actually worked both on the ISS as well as by completely novice people, regular people that flew on the Inspiration 4 flight, commercial flight with SpaceX in September. Another example is on the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of maturity. This is an early stage technology. This is what we would call a disruptive technology. The reason is that what it is it's what we call human organs on a chip. And we're using this system to study individual susceptibility to radiation damage. Not only that, we can actually test ways to protect that individual from the radiation damage by using the system. So how does this work exactly? So we can take blood cells from anybody, including Emma or Dana or any of you or our astronauts, and we can take the stem cells out of that blood sample. We can take those stem cells and now put them into a situation, a culture condition on a chip that you see here. It's a highly engineered capability, and make them become whatever tissue we want. It could become an organ like a heart. It could become an eyeball. It could become a lung. It could become muscle. It could become anything. And in fact, we can connect these things to each other where you can have multiple organ systems connecting and talking to each other, almost like a body on a chip. So what you see here is that we can actually now take your samples that have now become organs on a chip. This is cells that are normal and they behave like the organ. Lung cells can transport oxygen and carbon dioxide. Heart cells can start beating, and we can put this into a simulated space radiation field to actually see how your particular cells are going to respond to what they're going to feel when they go into space. And then once we figure out your susceptibility, your particular tissues, we can now start to test various drugs to protect your heart cells, your muscle cells, your bone cells from the damage. And so we're really excited about this. And so this is an early stage technology that we've invested in as well. Now, I've mentioned to you before that we really invested into increasing the end with all of these commercial partners that are now taking regular people into space. Inspiration 4 was the first commercial flight with SpaceX. Axiom is taking 4 individuals, including Israel's own Eitan Stibbe, and others have gone into space as well. We want to study all of those individuals, and while NASA astronauts, all their data goes into a database that NASA keeps, we are now collecting data from all of those private individuals, which have nothing to do with the space programs, the National Space Program or NASA or ESA or JAXA or even the Israeli Space Agency, but we're putting it into a database at TRISH called Expand. And we want to enable anybody, including Israeli researchers, who can come in and actually query that database and really look to see whether we can start to understand the differences between individuals as to how they respond to the space environment. So that's what we stood up very recently, and we're really excited because we're going to collect the Rakia missions data from Eitan and his crew members as well. Now I'm going to end, this is my last slide here, with this picture that was taken on the Mars surface. What I'm excited about is that we as a species have become so clever that we were able to land probes on such a distant planet. And not only that, we are working to put human boot prints on that distant planet as well. And everyone and everything that you've ever known in human history is on that dot right there. There's Earth. And so I'm real excited about the opportunity to study how humans can live among the stars. And thanks very much for giving me this opportunity. With that, I'm going to put up a slide on how to connect with us. And so these are all the different ways. And I'm happy to take questions if there's any time.
Thank you, Dorit. It was really fascinating, and we do have time for questions. That was the main point of our meetup, to allow people to reach out to you with questions. And Dana, please, if you can.
Dorit, can you expand on what you do with Israelis researchers at this time?
Yes. So through the Rakia mission and Ilan Ramon's foundation, we got connected with some Israeli researchers, and in particular from Sheba. And so we have now connected with several Israelis that have experiments on the Rakia mission. And we are looking to cross-reference the data that they're collecting with the data that we're collecting from the Rakia, and as well as the entire Axiom mission going up at the end of March. So their data sets will be combined with our data sets in the Expand database, and it'll facilitate collaborations between American researchers and Israeli researchers. Not only that, there we've begun dialogue. As I mentioned, we are looking for innovations all over the world. I mean, 5 years ago, I flew to Lithuania to find a device, to look at a device that could potentially assess pressure on the brain in a new way. And in fact, I was hoping to come to Israel for the space conference to really connect with Israeli inventors and startup companies. We've had discussions with Aleph Farms, who are 3D printing steaks. Again, thinking about the mission to Mars and being able to provide foods that are more than just a pack that you have to squeeze food out of, the different kinds of technologies that can be more sustainable in terms of food production. So there are lots of opportunities for us to interact and really work together with Israeli companies and Israeli researchers. Our funding cannot be given to international researchers. We can buy goods and services from international companies, but a lot of the Israeli startups that I've interacted with do have a U.S. Subsidiary. So the U.S. subsidiary would be eligible for our federal funding through the grants.
So Israeli researchers, there's a question about Israeli researchers that don't have a US citizenship. Do they need then, like in other programs, find a counterpart in the US or?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So typically what we've done with international researchers is we've connected them with American researchers who are working on something similar. Now, I'll give an example where it's been a little bit easier. So the European Space Agency does have its own funding, and I don't think Israel is part of the ESA. It's not part of the European Space Agency, and I know that the Israeli Space Agency, I'm not sure about the funding from Israeli Space Agency. I imagine it's fairly modest. Sometimes there are opportunities from the participating nations, space agencies, to do a collaboration. So we can help with that. In fact, if an Israeli researcher wanted to do something related to space, they would have to find their funding within Israel. But we would be happy to provide a letter of support that would say, we would support the counterpart here in the US, so that it looks it looks like there's, more of a chance for something to be an international collaboration. So it is challenging when you don't have your own funding within the nation, but oftentimes people get very creative on how they make something happen. Even just opening up the opportunity can make somebody, like even the Ramon Foundation can step up and fund a study.
Okay, we have a question from Michal Ziso. Michal, do you want to say your question?
Yes, of course. Hi, thank you so much. It was so interesting. I'm an architect and I research human-centered design solutions and environments for humans outside of Earth. And recently I have started a new venture, let's say, about quality of sleep in space. So I was wondering, do you have, or if you can talk about it, what is the latest from TRISH about quality sleeping in space, if you do any research in that area?
Yeah, so thanks for that question. So human-centered design is really important. It is amazing how people just don't even realize how much that is essential for not just your safety, for example, just something as simple as seatbelts. Okay, if they're designed for one size fits all, it could really cut a smaller woman across the neck if there is her braking really fast, or if you're a pregnant woman and it cuts across your belly, it could really harm the fetus. So human-centered design is critical, and especially in a spaceflight environment, if something's not designed properly, somebody can make a mistake and there could be deaths, there are consequences. So human factors is really important. I'm sorry to get on my soapbox about that. But in terms of answering your question, so there's been a lot of research done on sleep quality and sleep length in spaceflight. And we know that sleep absolutely affects everything, every physiological system and every mental system. So it's not just about the length of sleep that's critical. Most individuals, for healthy sleep, you need a minimum of 7 hours. Astronauts are getting 6.5. We don't quite understand why. We think it's really a schedule issue. They're just busy, and it's very hard for them to turn off their minds and to actually go to sleep. So hypervigilance is a problem. The second is not just duration of sleep that's absolutely critical, but it is also the quality of sleep, because you have to have the normal cycles of sleep, including a rapid eye movement, REM sleep, in which you dream, a deep sleep, a stage in your sleep, the delta waves, which is really important for deep sleep. That is when your brain is flushing out all the toxic metabolic waste that it's basically created as you're functioning and constantly thinking and doing things like that. So the sleep quality, that hasn't been solved yet in terms of really understanding whether astronauts are getting normal, healthy sleep quality. The concern with sleep really has to do with astronauts, with the way they operate. So when you think about the International Space Station, they go around the Earth about 16 times a day. So they get 16 sunsets and 16 sunrises. And so the circadian alignment of their brain, from getting the cues from the light and dark changing every 90 minutes, could really screw up their circadian rhythms. And so we artificially induce in astronauts a night and day. We actually turn everything, the lights off at night. And we, even though they're still getting the sunrise and sunset, we make them artificially induce a dark period. And so it's very similar to shift workers who have a similar problem. So understanding how to really entrain the circadian system for healthy sleep is really has a lot of applications here on Earth. In terms of the ISS, they're constantly getting slam shifted. What does that mean? It means that when a SpaceX resupply vehicle, when it gets shot up there with fresh foods and clean underwear for them, or bringing up a new crew, which, the Rakia mission will be bringing up in March, sometimes the way that it's aligned, they show up in the middle of the night for the crew. And so they have to, the astronauts up there have to be ready for that mission to arrive. And so they have to slam shift themselves, basically either stay up all night or sleep at the wrong time. And that really screws up their system. As we leave the International Space Station and go to the moon, they'll have probably a more regular cycle. And then certainly for Mars, they won't be going around the Earth 16 times a day. But then again, they won't have the light from the sun that will be in the same matter, light and day, like we're used to here on Earth. When you get on the surface of Mars, now your period is a little bit longer, and it doesn't seem, it's not a normal 24 hour, it's closer to 24.8. You would think that matters, but over a long period of time, you start to kind of shift away from Earth, and your bodies really start to whack out over that. I probably went down a rabbit hole with this, so I apologize if I gave you more than you asked for.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, we have another question from Martina. Martina, do you want to speak your question? Wait, you're still on mute,
Yes,
Martina?
yes,
Oh.
yes, just jumping on my buttons quickly enough. I'm wondering if you could comment on which research in space medicine has been going on in the past, present, and future, and which of these areas do you think have the biggest potential to improve life on Earth?
Oh, wow, that is a tough question. We have been studying every system for a very, very long time. Everything's been studied, but what's interesting, Martina, is that even though we think we know everything, we still don't know everything. And I'll give you an example. The spaceflight associated neuroocular syndrome. We knew that when astronauts went to space, they all of a sudden needed different pairs of glasses, or if they didn't need glasses, they now needed glasses. But then we started to look more closely, and then we looked in their eyeballs and we saw that there's a swelling of the optic nerve. That was discovered 10 years ago. We've been in space for much longer than that. So that was a new syndrome 10 years ago, and we still haven't figured out exactly what's going on. Just a week ago, there was a European paper that was published in Nature Medicine that looked at anemia, spaceflight-associated anemia. We knew that when astronauts went to space, because of the fluid shift, they actually decreased the overall plasma volume. They peed out a lot of the extra volume. And so we knew that because your blood became more concentrated, that they got rid of the extra red blood cells so that you don't end up making a lot of clots. But we thought that was just a temporary thing. And then all of a sudden, a week ago, the European group published that they're actually anemic. They stay anemic even after they adjusted during that first adjustment period. They stayed anemic throughout their mission, and they remain anemic even after they landed. So that was a new finding. I never would have guessed that. So there's always new things to study. And for me, that is so exciting because we get to study healthy individuals in space, as opposed to here on Earth, we're studying diseases. And once the disease has started, it's really hard to know what caused it, what the early stages are to that disease, because by the time you see the disease, it's already kind of gone down that way. So to me, spaceflight just in general is an amazing opportunity to study the early stages of all kinds of things that go wrong for all of us here on Earth as we age, or even go down a path where we're starting to show disease symptoms, because these are healthy people that have an accelerated acute response to a stressful environment. And now we're starting to see these changes. So to me, it's all incredibly impactful for Earth.
And it's also interesting to see the differences between males and females, right? Because in some body areas, they have impact in one gender and not the other. So I found that like pretty interesting and surprising, at least to me.
It's true. The condition I talked about with the swelling of the optic nerve, it's in men. I mean, women have some of it, but not to the degree that it's in men. And there have been a lot of hypotheses as to why women are more protected of this syndrome. One hypothesis, and again, nobody's proven it, is that estrogen and other reproductive hormones may protect women in the sense that their vascular compliance, the ability to stretch their vessels with the fluid changes in space, you know, we undergo a change when we have a pregnancy. Our bodies sort of expand and our blood volume changes to accommodate the extra fluid from the fetus. So perhaps because of that, women's compliance is different. That's one hypothesis. We just don't know for sure.
Yeah, it's also fascinating. Thank you.
Great. We have a question from Sarah. Sarah, would you like to speak your question?
Hi, good evening. Thank you. This was fascinating. And you mentioned personalized medicine, and I wanted to know whether you're going to be genotyping the next space travelers. I heard they do it at ESA, but I didn't know about NASA.
Yeah, it's a great question, Sarah. So, so I don't know if you heard of the twin study. The twin study is that two twins, Scott Kelly that went to space and his twin brother, Mark Kelly. NASA has been very nervous about using genetic information. Excuse me, a little fly here. So the reason is astronauts are very worried about genetic information giving some reason for the space agency not to send them to space. So I'll give you an example. There are a handful of genes that we know if you have a mutation like the BRCA1 gene, for example, if you have a BRCA1 mutation and you're a woman or even a man, you're very likely to develop breast cancer. That is known. There's a handful of things like that. So say, for example, we do genetic testing on an astronaut and she or he has a BRCA1 mutation. And the astronauts are very worried that the space agency will say, well, if you have a BRCA1, we're not going to send you to space because the increased radiation will make you more likely to develop cancer. The US Congress has passed an act called the GINA Act. It's the Genetic Information Non-Disclosure Act. And basically, it means that your employer cannot discriminate against you based on your genetic information. Even so, people are very reluctant. So NASA actually made a lot of progress with that twin study because they did a very deep genetic testing of these two individuals, but they made sure that they knew that the space agency could not use that information to discriminate against them. Now, you raise up a good point. We're starting to see a lot more private individuals. It really varies. I can tell you, we have now worked with 3 crews. We worked with the SpaceX crew, Inspiration 4. We worked with the Space Adventure crew, 2 Japanese national and a Russian cosmonaut. And we've now consented the 4 individuals going up with Axiom, including Aton. It varies greatly, people's tolerance for agreeing to let their genetic information be put into it. Now, our database is set up in such a way that we are not going to release any data that is not de-identified. That means that nobody will know that this particular data set belongs to Aton versus somebody else. In addition to that, we are going to make sure that we have enough samples in the database because there's so few people who have been to space. It'd be easy to tell who's who and when they went up. We actually have an ethics board that will oversee requests so that the data is only released when there's enough samples, enough N, so that we can truly anonymize who each sample belongs to. I hope that answered your question.
Oh, yeah, it does. And is it okay if I ask another question? Oh, thank you. So my next one is about the recent report on a blood clot that was detected in space. And you reminded me of that because you talked about anonymization of it. So what's the status now? Is there any research about this or something?
It's a great question. So it happened to a friend of mine, and she actually went public with that. So Serena Anand-Chancellor, who is a female astronaut, for those of you who don't know, she actually went public with a blood clot in her internal jugular vein, and it was found in spaceflight, and it made everybody very, very nervous. And in fact, the whole thing with the red blood cells is an interesting phenomena. What they found is that the zero gravity may be causing blood flow to move in the wrong direction, which is, if you're a physician, That ain't good. That is not good. So if blood is not draining properly from the head and it's actually moving in the opposite direction, could be why she had that blood clot. She was given medication that was luckily available on board, and they watched that clot very, very carefully. What's interesting about that is that it disappeared when she came back to Earth. So that blood clot behaved very strangely. We don't fully understand what happened with that, but we're really worried because if there is in fact retrograde or reverse blood flow in a lot of these astronauts, that we never saw that before, will there be other blood clots? The concern with the blood clot is if it goes to the lung, it could cause a pulmonary embolism, and that is a life-threatening situation. So the ultrasound that I showed, the technology that I showed you earlier, the all-in-one ultrasound, one of the main things we're doing with that when it's going in the hands of private individuals as well as astronauts is we're having everybody do the blood flow using that in the internal jugular vein to see whether we are seeing the flow go the opposite direction. So that's how we're keeping an eye on this. And the more individuals we get that scan on, the more information we have. But we're still worried about it. We don't know why it happened. She was on birth control, which, you know, birth control can cause clots in general. So that could have been a predisposing factor. But, you know, nobody wants to have their period in space. So it's not like we're going to have female astronauts going up without birth control. So we've got to figure out this problem.
Okay, we have another question. Sorry, Sarah. This is connecting exactly to what you said, because we have so few women who go up in space and we have no enough data set. So you say because there's not enough data set to be anonymous, how is there like stuff like the blood clot that are actually hidden and not available for researchers to know, and what can we do about it?
Right. So with Serena, she already made the decision not to fly again. And, you know, I think even if she was active astronaut thinking about flight again, the NASA itself or anybody, even SpaceX or Axiom, as they look at individuals flying, they look at medical issues beforehand. So they have to, the physician assigned to each mission has to make a decision as to pre-existing medical conditions. And so there is a board that meets as a medical board that meets regularly. And when there is a health condition that shows up in a person that's actually about to fly or have flown, there a lot of doctors kind of put their heads together and make an assessment. Is this something that is going to get worse? Because they not only want to make sure that nothing happens to that individual in flight, we also, NASA itself is an employer. And so you're responsible for the health of that individual, even when they leave the agency, because if something happens to them 30, 40 years later as a result of something they did on the job, you are liable. You are obviously going to want to prevent that. So yes, there are certainly medical issues that we know nothing about because it has to do with privacy laws, and you know it's a clinical decision. Now, if they are part of a research study, which is very different than the clinical things that we do with astronauts or people that go to space, if they're taking part of a research study and we see something that is of a concern, the researcher has an obligation to immediately let the physician know that I've seen this in the research protocol, but this has clinical implications. And so at that point, it becomes a negotiation or discussion with the physician and the person as to whether that research finding is made public.
Great. Okay, we have, let me see, more questions. We'll see what we can do. Michal, your turn again. If you want.
It's directly connected to what you've been talking about, and also to Martina's question that I see in the chat. I've been talking to a few people in the industry, and I learned that a lot of astronauts don't tend to complain about certain issues or to reveal things that are happening to them. And I also heard that female astronauts tend to say more, and sometimes it makes the research kind of wrong in a way, because they think that these symptoms happen more in women, but the reality is that they just tend to talk more about it. And I was wondering, if do you see now, after Inspiration 4 and maybe more commercial flights, do you see or do you get more data, or do you see a difference between the amount of information that people share regarding what they felt and what happened to them in space?
You raise an excellent point. Absolutely true what you said. So here's the thing. We've only done 4 an Inspiration 4 and 1 Japanese national so far. So I only have experience with five individuals. But you have to think about this. Those individuals, their career isn't to fly in space. Some of them may want to go again, but astronauts' careers depend on them flying again. So you're absolutely right. If you complain a lot and say you've had a lot of issues, yeah, it could potentially impact whether or not you get selected for another flight. Yes. So I think it's probably, there's a lot of underreporting, of course. And in fact, just a couple days ago, we ran a space motion sickness workshop, a very small closed door workshop, where one of the researchers who've been doing it for decades shared with us that an astronaut told him over a beer, after several beers, very quietly in a pub, that he never told anybody, but he was really, really sick from space motion sickness for most of his mission. But he didn't want to complain about it because he thought that it would actually impact what tasks he would be given. They all want to do spacewalks. So if mission control finds out that they're really sick, or they're taking, I mean, they have to track what medication they take for space motion sickness, that can make you sleepy. And so you're not quite as sharp. So you're absolutely right. People underreport the problems they're having. And so we really try to engage with a lot of former astronauts, retired astronauts. Some of them are very open and some of them are still very guarded as far as what they say. Will we learn a lot more from commercial or private people? Absolutely. I'm convinced of it. So that is another reason why we think it's important to collect that information. And now we're incorporating questionnaires, which I think will give us a lot more depth into what their experience is.
Thank you.
Okay. Martina, was your question covered, or do you have another one?
So yeah, one of my 2 questions was covered, and the other one was regarding health conditions. If you are familiar, like, are there conditions that qualify and disqualify astronauts to fly to space, whether they are like commercial or government ones? And also, how are those guidelines evolving over time? And I'm interested in physical health as well as the psychological, because I heard that some mental health aspects may be disqualifying or taken into consideration.
It's a really, really excellent question. All of them, and terrific questions. You have a very well-informed audience. Good job. So Martina, yes, there are obviously a lot of medical conditions that would prevent career astronauts from flying. I'll give you an example of a friend of mine who really wanted to be an astronaut. He had a fairly high coronary calcium score. So what that means is that you do imaging of the coronary arteries. And if there is a thickening in the coronary arteries and a lot of calcium is deposited, you are in a higher risk of developing essentially heart attacks. And so we know that spaceflight can be hard on the heart. Radiation environment can make the heart even more susceptible to thickening, hardening, calcium deposition, inflammation. So he was excluded from even becoming an astronaut. So while they're being pre-screened before they become astronauts, there's a lot of medical conditions that NASA will not take. But once NASA invested in somebody, for example, they train them, they know what to do, and now they develop a calcium score, they'll probably send somebody up even with a thickening or a hardening of the arteries. They'll just have to monitor them more carefully. So yeah, we know astronauts have developed the swelling of the optic nerve. Some of them are still going back up. We're just keeping a close eye on them. So in terms of career astronauts, yes, it's constantly a balance between risk versus the benefit of sending that individual with the specialized skills or knowledge to do a mission. In terms of commercial flyers, there was a beautiful study that was done by a group at a University of Texas medical branch. And it's the group that really does aerospace medicine. And Becky Blue is a friend of mine. She's one of the authors on that, and Richard Jennings. And the residents, the aerospace medicine residents, what they did is they took, I think it was like something like 100 different people with all kinds of conditions, all the way from 18 up to age 90. And they spun them, they put them into a centrifuge that would simulate the gravitational pull and the stress of the lift. Essentially, your most challenging point where your body is really experiencing a lot of stress is during lift and return. And when you're pulling a lot of gravitational forces against your body, that could be hard on the heart, it could be hard on the brain, it could be hard on the person in general. Plus the spinning in the centrifuge is a very confined space. And so if you have, for example, fear of enclosed spaces, and that could be a problem. And so what they determine, they put people in with a diabetic insulin pump. They put people in with heart pacemakers. They put people in with all kinds of conditions, blood pressure issues. And what they found is everybody did okay, with the exception of those that have high level of claustrophobia or stress, like just really a high anxiety. If they were high anxiety or have claustrophobia, those individuals did not do well and probably could not fly. So when you talk to flight surgeons who have worked with a lot of the commercial companies, it's probably those two conditions that would exclude somebody from flying. And these companies get them ready. They put them through a lot of testing, and they kind of observe these people to see how they do. But I really do think that it has to do with mental resiliency more than anything. I think people can be not in such great health and still do okay in space. I mean, it also depends on how long they're up there and what their tasks are. So if you're going to do a spacewalk, for example, you better be in shape. I hope that answered your question.
That's really interesting. And I'm even thinking if even the psychological aspect may be changing, because now we are developing all sorts of new technologies with VR that are supposed to fight PTSD and all sorts of phobias. So maybe this could also help people overcome these challenges if they really want to go.
Yes, good point.
Okay, we are getting to the end of our meetup. We have a final question which was asked by Jennifer. I see Sarah added to it, but let's have Jennifer, if you're still online, ask her question.
Hi, yes, thank you. I was just wondering if you could touch on what's currently being done to look at pharmacological stability in space.
Yeah, it's a great question. So we've been trying to solve this problem. As you know, drugs are not meant to go into a space environment where they're going to be sitting on a shelf, probably sitting on a Mars surface, or in a med kit on the lunar surface for a year and a half, 2 years, 3 years, exposed to radiation. Most drug stability studies are done at room temperature, maybe even extreme temperatures, but certainly nothing like we're going to experience in space, where they may have really varying cold and hot. So stability is actually still a major concern. What's being done is, you would think that they would have tested some stability already, and they have. NASA has looked at some drugs that have been in space for a long period of time, and there is concern for some drugs that there's degradation. And not only drugs, but nutrients. To me, it's not just the drugs, but like things like biotin or vitamin A or vitamin B, all these other things that you need to live. So the stability in foods, the stability as a supplement, those things are of concern as well. We've not figured it out. One of the things that TRISH is doing, again, NASA is supposed to be looking at all the things that are kind of make sense to do, right? So they're going to look at stability of these drugs. What TRISH is doing is actually a capability of making just-in-time pharmaceuticals. So the way we're doing that is using synthetic biology approaches, or even putting genetically engineering microbes and putting them into a stomach resident device that will sit there basically for 6 months to a year. And those microbes will be delivering the drug or the nutrient being made constantly in a constant rate by the microbes. So that's how we're approaching the problem. The other thing we've done is we've used, there's a researcher out of Tufts University that looks at spider silk protein, that when you formulate medication with the spider silk, it seems to stabilize that, so that when you have radiation exposure or other types of damage that can produce free radicals, which can be very bad for any molecule, any chemistry. The spider silk seems to kind of obviate that. So we are looking at kind of out of the box approaches on how to deal with pharmaceutical stability, but it is still an unsolved problem. Thanks for your question.
Okay, so thank you, Dorit, for your fascinating talk, and for everybody here on the audience for these great questions. We will provide opportunity to connect if you need, whether with Dorit or TRISH or with any other member here of this meetup, as well as you're always welcome to join us in future meetups and join our association, the Israeli Women in Space Association. If you want, please do. And we are very happy that you were all here. And I hope you do enjoy the Israeli Space Week starting this week. There's a lot of other talks and events, and make sure that you check up on them, because it's a lot of fun. Like every year, although it's not in person. We are hoping that for 2022, we will have a chance to see and meet again in person very soon, after this wave will decline a bit. And let's keep our fingers crossed.
And Dorit, we really hope that we'll be seeing you in Israel soon as well.
I'm coming in December for
Yeah,
personal
we're gonna
visit.
count on you.
I'm coming to visit you. You need to take me for coffee. You need to take me for coffee.
Yes, exactly. So we're gonna just make sure by 2022 we're gonna meet Diana at her observatory and meet Dorit in person. Don't miss it. So yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your time, Dorit, and for everything.
Great. Thank you all for coming, and I hope you had a good time.
Thank you so much. Great being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.